The Price of a Secret. Chapter 1. The Rent That Changed Everything. Lucy Thompson had always believed that marriage was built on honesty. At least, that was what she used to tell herself whenever life became difficult. The honesty had become a luxury she could no longer afford. The notice sat on the kitchen table like a death sentence. Rent overdue. 3 words. 3 simple words that had turned her stomach into knots. Outside, rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. The small, 2-bedroom flat they rented wasn't much, but it was home. Or at least it had been. Now it felt like a ticking time bomb. Lucy stared at the paper while waiting for her husband to come home. John was late. Again, lately, everything about him had changed. He spent hours locked in the spare room. He became defensive whenever she asked questions. And somehow, there was never enough money. Not for groceries. Not for electricity. Not for rent. Yet he always claimed he was handling it. Lucy folded her arms. Handling it? The landlord had already called 3 times that week. A 4th call came just after 6. She answered immediately. "Hello." A deep, calm voice responded. "Lucy, it's Mr. Carter." Lucy closed her eyes. Of course. The landlord. Richard Carter. 52 years old. Divorced. Financially successful. And annoyingly handsome for a man his age. The kind of man who seemed to age like expensive wine. Every woman in the building noticed. Most pretended they didn't. "Mr. Carter," she said nervously. "I hate making these calls." "Please," Lucy whispered. "Just give us more time." A long silence followed. Then came an unexpected response. "Maybe we should discuss this in person." Her stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "I'll stop by tomorrow." Before she could ask anything else, he hung up. The next evening, John was nowhere to be found. Again, Lucy checked the clock. 7:30. Then the doorbell rang. She opened it. Richard Carter stood there holding an umbrella. Tall, well-dressed, confident. The kind of confidence that came from never worrying about bills. "May I come in?" he asked. Lucy hesitated before stepping aside. He entered slowly. His eyes scanned the apartment. The worn furniture, the peeling paint, the signs of financial struggle. "Things are difficult?" he asked gently. Lucy laughed bitterly. "Difficult doesn't begin to describe it." Richard nodded. "I understand." "No, you don't." For a moment neither spoke. Then Richard surprised her. "I know about your husband." Lucy blinked. "What?" "He owes money all over town." Her heart skipped. "What are you talking about?" Richard sighed. "I didn't want to believe it myself." Then he pulled out his phone. "Look." Lucy stared at the screen. Her blood turned cold. Several payment records. Online transactions. Hundreds of dollars. Some even larger. All directed towards subscription platforms. Adult content sites. OnlyFans accounts. Month after month. Thousands gone. Money that should have gone toward rent. Groceries. Their future. Lucy felt physically ill. "No." Richard's expression softened. "I'm sorry." Her hands trembled. "No. There must be some mistake." "There isn't." Tears formed instantly. Not because of the money. Because of the betrayal. Every argument. Every excuse. Every promise. A lie. John hadn't been struggling to pay rent. He had chosen not to. Lucy sat down heavily. Her world suddenly felt unstable. Richard remained silent, giving her space. Finally, she looked up. "Why are you showing me this?" His eyes met hers. "Because I don't think you deserve to be blindsided." For a moment, something unspoken passed between them. A connection. Dangerous. Unexpected. And deeply inappropriate. Lucy quickly looked away. But she couldn't ignore the fact that Richard was treating her with more respect than her own husband had shown in months. That realization frightened her, because part of her appreciated it a little too much. John stumbled through the front door close to midnight. Lucy was waiting. The evidence sat on the table. He froze immediately. His face lost all color. "Lucy," she stood. Slowly, quietly. Sometimes quiet anger is far more terrifying than shouting. "What is this?" John swallowed. "I can explain. Can you?" He looked everywhere except at her. That told her everything. The truth. The shame. The guilt. "How much?" she asked. No answer. "How much?" John finally whispered the number. Lucy nearly collapsed. It was enough money to cover nearly 4 months of rent. 4 months. Gone. For strangers on a scream. The silence that followed felt endless. Then John made the worst mistake possible. He tried to justify it. "I was stressed." Lucy laughed. A painful laugh. "Stressed?" "I wasn't thinking clearly." "You certainly thought clearly enough when you entered your credit card details." John's jaw tightened. "This isn't all my fault." Lucy stared. Disbelief filled her face. "Not all your fault. If you paid more attention to me." The slap echoed through the apartment. Neither moved. John touched his cheek. Lucy pointed toward the bedroom. "Get out of my sight." For the first time in years, John actually looked afraid of her. And perhaps he should have been. Because neither of them knew that an even bigger disaster was waiting, just around the corner. One that would involve the landlord. A dangerous misunderstanding. And a decision that would destroy their marriage forever. The price of a secret. Part 2. Whispers in the hallway. For 3 days after the argument, the apartment felt like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. No shouting. No slammed doors. No apologies. Just silence. The kind of silence that creeps into every corner of a home and makes even the ticking of a clock sound loud. Lucy and John moved around each other like strangers sharing a hotel room. She cooked. He ate. She cleaned. He disappeared into the spare room. Nobody talked about the money. Nobody talked about the lies. But both knew the problem hadn't vanished. The rent was still unpaid. And the deadline was approaching. Every morning Lucy woke with the same knot in her stomach. What would happen if they were evicted? Where would they go? How would they start over at their age? For a woman in her 40s, the thought of losing everything she'd worked for was terrifying. Not because she feared hardship, but because she knew how hard it was to rebuild once life knocked you down. She had spent years helping John climb out of financial mistakes. Years sacrificing her own wants. Years believing they were a team. Now she wasn't sure she knew who he was anymore. On Friday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Lucy already knew who it was. Richard Carter, the landlord. She opened the door carefully. He stood there holding a folder. His usual calm expression remained unchanged. "May I come in?" Lucy hesitated, then stepped aside. Richard entered. John wasn't home. Again, that fact alone irritated her. Richard placed the folder on the dining table. "I've reviewed your account." Lucy braced herself. "I assume that's bad news." He sighed. "It isn't good." She nodded. "Expected." "What happens now?" Richard folded his hands. "There are legal procedures." The word struck like ice water. Legal procedures. Eviction. Court notices. Moving trucks. Embarrassment. Humiliation. Lucy felt her throat tighten. Richard noticed immediately. "Sit down." She sat. For several moments neither spoke. Then Richard surprised her. "There may be another option." Lucy looked up. "What kind of option?" "I can authorize a temporary reduction." Her eyes widened. "A reduction?" 50%. For a second she thought she'd heard him wrong. "Half." He nodded. "Only for 1 month." Lucy stared. "That would save them." At least temporarily. It would give them time. Breathing room. Hope. But something about the offer made her uneasy. Why? Richard smiled faintly. Because I've seen good people fall on hard times. Lucy studied his face. There was no arrogance. No hidden smirk. No expectation. Just kindness. And somehow that made her even more uncomfortable. Because kindness had become rare. Especially from men. That evening Lucy told John. She expected relief. Gratitude. Instead, she saw suspicion. Why would he do that? Lucy frowned. What do you mean? No landlord cuts rent in half. He said he wanted to help. John laughed. A short, bitter laugh. Men like Richard Carter don't help people for free. Lucy's expression hardened. You don't even know him. I know men. The irony nearly made her laugh. A man who had spent thousands on online models was suddenly an expert on male behavior. You should be thanking him. John crossed his arms. I'm not thanking another man for saving my marriage. The words hung in the air. Saving my marriage. Lucy almost pointed out who had endangered it in the first place. But she was too exhausted to argue. Over the next week, Richard stopped by several times. Always briefly. Always professionally. Sometimes paperwork. Sometimes updates. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing secretive. Yet people noticed. And people talked. Apartment buildings were like small villages. Rumors traveled faster than elevators. Mrs. Henderson from Unit 3B noticed. The retired widow across the hall noticed. The young receptionist downstairs noticed. Soon whispers began. Quiet at first. Then louder. Richard seems interested in Lucy. They spend a lot of time talking. Have you seen the way he looks at her? Most of it wasn't true. But rumors rarely needed truth. Only opportunity. And opportunity was everywhere. One afternoon Lucy ran into Mrs. Henderson in the hallway. The older woman smiled knowingly. Richard seems very attentive. Lucy immediately understood. Her cheeks warmed. It's not like that. Mrs. Henderson's smile widened. If you say so. Lucy walked away feeling irritated. People always assume the worst. Especially when a woman and a man shared a conversation. Unfortunately, someone else was listening. John. He had returned home unexpectedly early. And he had heard enough. Not the entire conversation. Only the final part. Enough to feed his growing insecurity. That evening he became strangely quiet. Watching. Observing. Questioning. Did Richard stop by today? Lucy looked up from dinner. Yes. What did he want? Paperwork. Only paperwork. The accusation was subtle, but present. Lucy set down her fork. What exactly are you asking? John shrugged. Nothing, yet his eyes said otherwise. And Lucy knew it. Over the next few days, John's behavior worsened. He checked windows, asked questions, made comments. None direct. All suspicious. It reminded Lucy of something she'd once heard. People who hide secrets often assume everyone else is hiding secrets too. Perhaps guilt was finally catching up to him. Or perhaps he genuinely believed something was happening. Either way, the tension grew. Then came the night, everything changed. A storm rolled across the city. Heavy rain hammered the streets. Thunder shook windows. Lucy was alone. John had claimed he was working late. Again, at around 8 o'clock, the lights suddenly went out. The apartment plunged into darkness. Lucy sighed. Perfect. Just what she needed. A power outage. She searched for candles. A few minutes later, another knock sounded at the door. She opened it carefully. Richard stood outside holding a flashlight. The whole block lost power. Lucy nodded. I noticed. I wanted to check on everyone. For a moment they stood listening to rain. Then lightning flashed. A loud crack of thunder followed. Lucy jumped slightly. Richard smiled. Still afraid of storms? She blinked. How did you know that? You told me. She had. Weeks earlier. A casual conversation. The fact that he remembered caught her off guard. Because John rarely remembered anything she said anymore. The realization stung. Richard noticed her expression. What is it? Lucy shook her head. Nothing, but it wasn't nothing. And both of them knew it. At that exact moment, John pulled into the parking lot. He wasn't working late. He had left early. Suspicion had consumed him all day. Now he wanted answers. As he climbed the stairs, he saw something that made his heart pound. Richard standing inside his apartment doorway. Lucy facing him. Both smiling. The hallway dimly lit by flashlight. To anyone else, it looked innocent. To John, it looked like betrayal. And once a mind becomes convinced of something, it starts seeing proof everywhere. John stood frozen at the end of the corridor, watching, listening, building a story in his head. A story that wasn't entirely true, but wasn't entirely false either. Because although Lucy had done nothing wrong, she was beginning to feel something she never expected. Respect, comfort, connection. And those feelings can be just as dangerous as an affair. Sometimes even more dangerous. As thunder rolled across the sky, John turned around and walked away without being seen. His jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists. For the first time, a frightening thought entered his mind. What if he was losing his wife? And for the first time, another question appeared alongside it. What if he deserved to? The price of a secret. Part 3. The night everything broke. The following morning, Lucy woke with a strange feeling she couldn't explain. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives after months of confusion. The kind that forces you to stop lying to yourself. For weeks she had focused on the unpaid rent. The bills. The embarrassment. The possibility of eviction. But now she realized those things weren't the real problem. The real problem was trust. And trust, once broken, rarely returns the same way it left. John sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee. Neither spoke. The silence stretched. Finally, Lucy broke it. Are you happy, John? He looked up. The question caught him off guard. What kind of question is that? A simple one. He looked away. Lucy already had her answer. Because happy people don't spend their rent money escaping into fantasy. Happy people don't lie for months. Happy people don't destroy their marriages one secret at a time. Later that afternoon, Lucy made a decision. She logged into the family computer. Not because she wanted to spy. Not because she wanted revenge. But because she needed the truth. All of it. What she discovered left her speechless. The OnlyFans subscriptions were only the beginning. There were hidden credit card balances, personal loans, late fees, interest charges, months of financial deception. John wasn't merely irresponsible. He had buried them under a mountain of debt. Debt she knew nothing about. Debt that would take years to repay. Her hands trembled as she reviewed the numbers. The rent money wasn't the worst thing he'd done. Not even close. The rent money was simply the first lie she had discovered. There were dozens more underneath it. And every lie had a cost. That evening Richard stopped by with documents regarding the temporary rent reduction. Lucy invited him inside. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Almost peaceful. Richard noticed her expression immediately. You found something. She nodded. How could you tell? Because you looked disappointed. A tear escaped before she could stop it. I thought it was one mistake. Richard remained silent, listening. I thought maybe he was embarrassed. Another tear followed. But he lied for months. Richard handed her a tissue. Nothing more. No touching. No dramatic gesture. Just kindness. And strangely, that simple act nearly broke her. Because kindness was exactly what she'd been missing. Across town, John sat in his car. His mind was spiraling. The image of Lucy and Richard together replayed repeatedly. Every smile, every conversation, every interaction. Jealousy is a dangerous thing. It convinces people of stories that don't exist. And sometimes it reveals truths they don't want to face. For the first time in years, John asked himself a difficult question. Why was he so afraid of losing Lucy now? Where had that fear been 6 months ago? Where had it been when he spent money they couldn't afford? Where had it been when she cried over bills? Where had it been when she begged him to be honest? The answer hurt, because he had taken her for granted. He assumed she'd always stay, no matter what, no matter how badly he behaved, no matter how little effort he made. And now someone else was showing her respect. Not romance, not an affair, just respect. And suddenly he realized how powerful that could be. 3 days later, everything exploded. Lucy was preparing dinner when John walked through the door carrying a folder. His face looked pale, defeated, different. Without speaking, he placed the folder on the table. "What is this?" Lucy asked. "My debt." She stared. "What?" "Everything. Every loan. Every credit card. Every hidden account. Every lie. All documented. No excuses. No manipulation. No blaming. Just truth. The complete truth." For nearly an hour, they sat across from each other discussing everything. The arguments. The lies. The shame. The loneliness. The resentment. Years of buried frustration finally surfaced. At one point, Lucy cried. At another point, John did. Neither had expected that. Then came the hardest question. "Did you have feelings for Richard?" The room became still. Lucy took a deep breath. This was the moment. The moment where she could lie. Or tell the truth. "I admired him." John closed his eyes. The answer hurt. But she continued. "I admired the way he treated people." Another pause. "I admired that he listened." John looked down. She wasn't finished. "I admired that he kept his word." Each sentence struck harder than the last. Because every quality she admired in Richard was something John had stopped giving her. "But I never cheated." John nodded slowly. Deep down he already knew that. And somehow that made everything worse. Because he couldn't blame another man. The marriage hadn't been damaged by Richard. It had been damaged by him. A week later, the final rent meeting arrived. Lucy and John sat across from Richard in his office. The atmosphere felt strange. Heavy, important. Richard reviewed the paperwork, then looked at both of them. "You've been approved for the temporary reduction." Relief washed over them. For the first time in months, they had breathing room. As the meeting ended, Richard stood. "So what happens now?" The question seemed simple, yet it carried enormous weight. What happened now? Would they stay together? Separate? Start over? Nobody knew. Outside the building, Richard shook John's hand. Then something unexpected happened. John spoke quietly. "I owe you an apology." Richard looked surprised. "For what?" "I assumed things." Richard smiled faintly. "It happens." "No," John said. "You helped us when you didn't have to." For a moment the two men simply looked at each other. Then Richard nodded and walked away. Months passed. Slowly life improved. Not magically, not perfectly, but honestly. John cancelled every subscription, paid off debts, attended financial counselling, worked overtime, kept promises. Small promises at first, then larger ones. Lucy noticed. Trust didn't return overnight, but piece by piece it returned. Like rebuilding a house after a storm. One brick at a time. Nearly a year later, Lucy stood on the balcony watching the sunset. John stepped beside her. Neither spoke for a while. Then he handed her an envelope. She opened it. Inside was a receipt. The final debt payment. Everything was cleared. Every loan. Every balance. Every secret. Gone. Lucy stared at the paper. Then at her husband. You did it, John smiled. We did it. For the first time in a long time, she believed him. Years later, Lucy would often think back to that terrible season of her life. The unpaid rent. The lies. The landlord. The rumors. The heartbreak. At the time, she thought Richard Carter had entered her life to save her marriage. But eventually she realized the truth. Richard hadn't saved anything. He had simply held up a mirror. A mirror that forced both her and John to see what their marriage had become. The choice to fix it had always been theirs. And thankfully, they made the right one. Because the real story was never about the landlord. It was never about the rent. It was never even about the money. It was about something far more valuable. The moment two people stop taking each other for granted. And the moment they decide that love is worth fighting for again. The end.